Greetings and welcome to the Dr. J Vlog series. It is Monday, July 7th, 2025, and on Mondays we talk about mathematics and statistics. And you're here, I'm assuming, because you love math and stats, right? Maybe not. But let's have some fun. So here are a few stats to quickly summarize some of the information about this channel. So yesterday, July 6th, that is on the Sunday, I posted my 200th video on the Dr. J channel. In terms of the Dr. J vlog series specifically, though, let me clarify. We're now in our 27th week. And thus far, if you include today's vlog, this counts as number 184 in the series. That's right, 184 vlogs thus far. And not counting the introductory vlog on January 1st, if you're keeping track, then that means that I've now been posting for 183 consecutive days since January 4th. That's right. I've been posting vlogs now daily for just over 6 full months. And the vlogs generally, on average, about 20 to 22 minutes. Again, there's some variability. The shortest have been about 6 to 7 minutes. The longest, I had one that was about 40 minutes in length. So anyway, don't worry about it. I'm not going to be putting all of this on the final exam at the end of the year, so you don't have to know all of this. I'll just tell you which vlogs you need to study to prepare. No, just having a little bit of fun in my little mini inside reference to university teaching, because I'll often get the question, and you may have heard this or maybe asked this yourself, is this going to be on the final exam? So that's probably the single most commonly heard question that I hear. That and are you married still? No, I'm kidding. Anyway, but actually the favorite one that I've always enjoyed is when a student's not able to get to class, and these days they'll typically email me and they'll say something like, "Oh yeah, sorry, I had to miss the class for a doctor's appointment," whatever, and then they'll ask something along the lines of, "Did we cover anything important?" And to which, when I was younger, I used to reply something along the lines of, "Nope, because you weren't there, we decided to cancel the entire class." Aha, laugh, laugh. But the reply that I've never said, but I've always wanted to say, is that no, we didn't cover anything important. In fact, we never cover anything important. Why do you ask? Anyway, by the way, how do you then measure the work that you've done, the importance of the work that you've done? How do you know you've done a good job? How do you evaluate whether you're doing a good job or not? In sports, it's pretty straightforward, right? So did you make the team, and are you a starter or not? Maybe that would be one metric. Or did you win or lose the game, the competition? Or what place did you finish in? Did you do your best time? Did you have your best game from a statistical standpoint or otherwise? And I think that's partly why we kind of love sports, because there's so many obvious and objective and kind of common sense ways to evaluate success and improvement. And the same thing applies in many respects with business. Okay, so for many people, depending upon their line of work, what's the key metric of success? In other words, in business, what's the bottom line? Trick question. That's the answer. The bottom line. For many, right? Again, it depends on what you're doing and whether you're the owner, etc. But yeah, you want to basically assess how well is your business doing? What kind of profits are you turning? What do your quarterly reports look like? How many employees do you have, etc.? And if you're traded publicly, how's your stock doing? Okay, and so on. More personally, perhaps you gauge your work's success in terms of your advancement within the corporate ladder, or the raises that you get, or maybe just the praise and appreciation that you get from your bosses and coworkers, and so on. And in academia, there's an obvious measure as well, at least that's in terms of research institutions. What's your measure of success? Much like the bottom line in business, it's the bottom line of publications. So in business, all else equal, you obviously want to make more and more money each year, increase your profits. And obviously, if you're investing, that's also the case. And then in a research university, we're supposed to be active researchers. We're supposed to be producing research. And if that's the case, then our measure of success, very narrowly defined, would be the number of publications on which our name appears. Again, all else equal, the more publications, the better. I won't get into my critique of that metric today, but that's the basic way that we look at these things. And so the obvious point is that how we measure success in terms of our work and what metrics we use really depends on the nature of the work and how important are different aspects. And then how would we measure those different aspects? I was watching a young woman actually today who was working at a Tim Hortons, okay, coffee shop, for those of you who are in the States, a very popular one here in Canada, maybe the most popular one. Anyway, so her job was basically to prepare all of the bagels and the bagel sandwiches and so forth, okay? And she looked at this automated screen. She kept looking up to see what was flashing on the screen, what was coming up next. And then she prepped whatever sandwich, right, that she was instructed to do, whatever came up. And I was thinking it as I watched her, wow, you really had to be fast and efficient to stay on top of these orders, right? And they're coming nonstop. I was thinking of the I Love Lucy show, if any of you remember that from the 1950s. And I was thinking, about the scene with Lucy and Ethel, that famous scene where they're at the chocolate factory and they're supposed to be wrapping these chocolates as they come across the conveyor belt, and it just keeps going faster and faster, and they're struggling to keep up. Anyway, that's what I was thinking. So it wasn't quite that bad, but I was imagining how tiring that could be, that particular job could be. You really have to stay alert and focused to get the orders right. And they just keep coming. And I guess that's just the nature of a good fast food business. But here's the thing, the pay is usually not that great, as you probably know if you've worked in the industry. I know how it goes. I worked in the rest. That's where I started way back in the day, okay? My first paychecks were literally from the restaurant business. So I worked at a Bob's Big Boy for 2 years, from age 14 to age 16. And every 6 to 9 months or so, I got a raise. And so that was pretty cool. I started at $2 an hour back in 1976, and I was ecstatic to get my first raise, a full 10%, to $2.20 per hour. So that was quite remarkable, for at least my little brain. And then for my next raise, we went up to $2.45 per hour. So that was really amazing. And then finally, I think I topped out at $2.60 an hour before retiring from the restaurant business after those 2 years. Okay, but what about other kinds of jobs then? Especially in an information economy, which is where most of us actually work to varying degrees, information and service industries. And so there are many different kinds of jobs then that basically involve processing and sharing different kinds of information. So everything from sharing it with customers to clients to students and so on. So how do we measure effectiveness in your work in these areas? In some industries, they'll actually track productivity through a ticket process, through each ticket that you cover, that you tick off, that you complete, excuse me, might represent a call or a client inquiry. And it's kind of keeping the equivalence of your sales. So that's one way, of course, obviously, to measure productivity. What about the teaching field? Because many of us are going to be involved in teaching. I don't just mean university teaching, such as myself, but there's all kinds of different teaching and sharing of information that goes on. And that's a big part of so many of our jobs. And so how do you know if you've been a productive teacher? Again, whether you're talking about teaching swimming lessons or doing a workshop for your colleagues at work on safety, to, again, doing what I do, which is teaching young people and sometimes older people at a university. So a lot of times we'll get feedback, of course, to see, from the people that attended. That'll tell us how we've done. So in university teaching, for example, students complete teacher evaluations, usually have a combination of like standardized questions in the form of the professor was prepared, or the professor, whatever, strongly agree, disagree, strongly disagree. And then usually some type of open-ended questions as well. And that's where the students can discuss what they liked and didn't like about the course or about the professor in general. And then you also have these informal social media apps. You have things like ratemyprofessor.com. So that's another way to get the message or the word out about different professors. You could even produce your own podcast in this day and age, right? And talk about different profs. or whatever you like. So for me, I've always measured the quality of my teaching more by the informal feedback that I get from the students, especially, for example, on the last day of class. And even better, when they'll contact me later on down the road after they've graduated to let me know how they're doing or what they're up to and so on. And then occasionally I'll run into a former student all over town, especially since I've been teaching in London for 22 years. So it's not uncommon to run into students in all kinds of different places. So that happens, or I'll run into them sometimes at the airport or out of town. That's a thing. And I've been invited to some students' weddings, and in one case, to a student's son's wedding. So that's, as I say, I'm getting a little bit older there, right? But anyway, okay. So that's just the way the way of the world in my field. So, but really cool thing happened to me the other day. It was about a month ago. I was taking the car in to get the tires changed, and so while that was happening, I decided to walk over to the Walmart where they had a little McDonald's, and I bought a Coke, dollar Cokes. So, and I sat down with my laptop and I started to do some work. I'm sipping on my Coke. Great. And as I'm sitting there, a person comes up to me. I didn't know who it was, and they said, "Is that my favorite professor?" And I looked up, and of course, now I didn't. Sometimes I don't know who the person was when they'll recognize me, but I don't always recognize them, especially after 38 years of teaching. But anyway, in this case, I did kind of recognize her too, and I didn't remember her name right away, but she had a Walmart tag, and it had her name on it, and then I remembered exactly who it was. And so yeah, we chatted for a couple of minutes, but it was almost embarrassing. She went on and on. She said, "Oh, you're my favorite professor of all time, and you changed my life, etc." And this is like 13 years ago. And she was telling me about her experience and why and then she said something really sweet. She said, "I've been wanting to tell you all these years. I've been wanting to thank you." And a couple of things that stood out about this particular encounter. First of all, she was also very self-effacing. She said, "Oh, I know it doesn't look like much. I just work at Walmart." And I remember thinking to myself, I'd work at Walmart too if I had a good job or if they paid me well or whatever, if it fit my lifestyle. I don't care where somebody works. I don't think, "Oh, you're this or you're that." I just, people work wherever they work. And then what I'm more interested in is how they feel about the work. What do they like about the work? What do they enjoy about it? Is it a good fit? Is it, are they do they have a longer term trajectory in mind in terms of their careers or whatever? I just like hearing about them and their jobs. And really, I'll deliver flyers. I don't care. But her point is that, well, I should back up. I should add one little detail. So she had some kind of a brain injury, years ago, and that's impeded the way that she communicates and so forth. And so she might sound a little different to your average person. Of course, you don't know her story, her backstory. But fortunately, again, cognitively and intellectually, she's fine, and in many other respects. But it did impede some of her ability with her writing, etc. So anyway, we talked about all this years ago, and I said, "No problem. You're obviously smart. You obviously know what's happening. Blah blah blah." Long story short, I helped her as she needed. She passed the course, but what I didn't realize that I was doing at the time, and this is what she conveyed to me, was I was giving her confidence in herself. And she said it just made such a difference. And so again, while she was being very self-effacing and very, humble in terms of her work, again, all I'm thinking is that, wow, good for you. You found a place in this world. You're doing something that you enjoy. You're successful at it. And I didn't realize it, but I guess I had a small part to play. I'm not going to take any credit. I'm just going to take whatever credit she gave me, so to speak. But it does make a difference. And I remember thinking to myself, cha-ching, Dr. J, you just got paid. So yeah, that's kind of my big payoff, if you will. When somebody's doing well or they've learned something from me and they've been able to put it in. I got an email once from a student. This is about 10 years ago. And she was in Sweden, and she goes, "Man, I never thought I'd be able to, I hated stats. I never thought I'd be able to use these, but you know what? I just want to thank you." I said, "Why?" In her email, "I got a job here in Sweden because I knew some stats. And I remember the things that we'd learned in stats class, and I was able to secure this job." So I wish I didn't keep that email, I don't think. But yeah, that to me was really cool. So again, you never know where your work is going to pay off down the road, not necessarily for yourself personally, but again, in terms of the lives that you affect. I'm sure a lot of people know that when you're in healthcare and you're saving lives, or relieving people of pain, and or even as a therapist when you're helping somebody get better. All of these different fields, there's so many obvious indicators of improvement or success, or where you can see that you've helped other people. In teaching, it's not always so obvious. So that's what I mean. It's pretty cool when you sort of get paid the way that I did, and just randomly, somebody that you run into years later, and that sort of thing. And so I guess at some level, when we're thinking about the quality of the work that we do, it's more than just the mathematics of your earnings or the other statistical metrics that we can and people have created to evaluate the nature of the work that we do and how to determine whether we're being productive and efficient and so on. And I really do think that there's an intrinsic evaluation that's really kind of the key to all of this. So do you feel in your bones, again, whatever the work that you do, I'm not here to judge whether that's good work or important work or bad. I just want to know, how do you feel about the work that you're doing? So if you know in your bones that you feel that you've done a good job, and if you're genuinely happy with the work that you've done, and again, I just mean literally on a day-to-day basis, then to me, that's what really matters in the long run. Right? So in a more business-oriented language, I might put it this way. I'd say, I'd rather serve half as many people or customers or students twice as well rather than twice as many folks half as well, if that makes any sense. So anyway, but if I do get, by the way, twice as many customers or twice as many students, what I tell myself is that, okay, Dr. J, now you got to be prepared to work twice as long. You've got more demand. You've got more people who need your attention, who have paid for your attention, so to speak, and so on. I wish I got more money for the students that I taught or have taught over the years. Or if you teach more students, could you get more money, right? Because I think if I'd gotten paid by the students that I've taught over the last 38 years, I'd actually be quite wealthy. But again, you're just given a fixed salary. So that's why financially I am where I am. But I've taught, I think, and I calculated this today, roughly 10,000 students at the university level, upwards of 10,000. But bear in mind, that's where the largest classes in my case have always been topped at about 100 for an intro class, or I've taught a few intro classes like that. Not the 500 or 1,000 student type of things. So those could quickly add up, and you don't really get to know people when you have that many students in your class in any event, right? And then some people teach these huge MOOCs, these massive open online courses, MOOCs, and they can have even more students enrolled. Okay, but instead for me, I'm just basing my numbers on the idea that I've probably taught about 250 to 300 students each year on average. Again, it depends. For the last 38 years or so. And then some years were just part-time. A couple of years I've had sabbaticals and that sort of thing. So, but I wish I'd kept my old grade books. I didn't do that. The old student rosters, etc. And what I can tell you, though, is that when I did start university teaching, I didn't have a personal computer to do any of this work on. I typed my notes if I wanted to type, or I hand wrote them, mostly longhand on legal paper. But then if I wanted it a little more formal, I would type up my notes on an old-fashioned typewriter. I didn't have a PC at the time. And then sometimes I would, if I had something, a handout, I would photocopy it and then literally hand them out to the students in class. And then for the final grades, I had to turn in my grades calculated by hand and then written down on a hard copy of the final grade sheet. That was the important, the final grade sheet. And that's what you turn into the registrar. And we were always instructed, make sure you make a copy of this in case you lose the original. Okay, fine. But I didn't keep all those down the road all these years later. But it'd be really cool if I did. Then I could know exactly who the mathematician or the statistician in me would like to have a big spreadsheet with every name of every student that I've ever taught and so on. I'm sure I could find something pretty cool to do with all that information. But anyway, that's not the case. So technologically, I guess what I am saying, though, is, oh, yeah, and then, by the way, I used to walk to school with an old-fashioned briefcase. So I'd have again, my notes, my handwritten notes or typed notes in some cases. I'd have some books and then again, legal pads and pens and so on. And even a calculator, maybe an old fashioned calculator. And that's all I had. And I'd walk into the office and there was no computer on the desk. There was no networking. There was no email to be sent out to everybody. If you wanted something to go to your colleagues, you took it to the secretary, or maybe you had something that you typed out, you photocopied it, and when you stuck it in a physical hard copy in everybody's mailbox, because we had mailboxes. So that was what it was like in the 1980s. It was truly a different world. In fact, I used to like watching that show, A Different World, on the TV, which started back in 1987, the same year that I started university teaching. And I'd watch that show right after The Cosby Show, with legendary comedian Bill Cosby, all part of NBC's Thursday night lineup. Unfortunately, the Bill Cosby Show, or at least the individual, didn't age too well, as many of you are quite well aware, but that's another story for another day. So to wrap up, sure, you can use math and stats to evaluate the quality of your work, and there's a number of good ways to do that. And it really depends, though, on what you're asking and what you're interested in. But I think that most of us simply know in our hearts and in our bones whether we've done a good job or had a good day at work. And then conversely, again, speaking for myself, I usually know when I've not done a good job, or, I haven't had a good lecture, or whatever the case, or I haven't written a good paper. I almost always know. And so that's why I'm a little bit hard on myself, but that's okay. And you probably know too, whatever your line of work, when you've had a good day or a bad day, whether you've done some good work that you can be proud of, and so on. Okay. And then I guess the final point that I make is that that's why I also always try to do some real prep before I head into work. And again, maybe you do too, depends on your line of work. And what I mean by that, well, it's not just the lecture preparations, right? But in addition, I like to focus on all the different facets of the university experience, including I make sure that I'm, showered and shaved. Well, not always shaved, but and wash my hair, whatever. And I always attend class and teach with a coat and tie. That's not required. Most people don't do that anymore. But that's just something that I started way back when, part of being a professional, shall we say. The one exception, sometimes I'll wear my coat and tie with jeans. So that's me being a little bit more edgy and informal. But anyway, why do that? Well, again, it's just something that I've done my entire teaching life. And the idea is that, oh, by the way, if it gets really hot in the classroom, I'll take off the coat too, right? So if I'm sweating or whatever. But anyway, the point is I wear the coat and tie because I want to send a message every time in class. Not oh, look at me, I'm the professor. No, it's actually about the students. I want them to, it's kind of like a first date, aren't you supposed to be on your best behavior and well-dressed, whatever that may look like in your world? And for me, it's the same thing with teaching. I want them to know every time I walk into the classroom that I've prepared, that I've cleaned up, that I've gotten organized, and that I've put on my uniform, so to speak. Think of it as the jacket and the tie is, something like a uniform. And I want them to know that I'm ready to play. I'm ready to step out onto the university floor and have a good game, shall we say? Okay. All right. So that's how I look at it. A little bit from mathematics, a little bit of stats, but a little bit more qualitative feedback today as well. So I hope this has been interesting. Thanks for staying until the end of class today, and you'll get a bonus mark if you'll sign in now at the end of class. I'll give you an extra half a mark for being here. All right, as ever, may you and yours continue to create peace in your lives, nurture love in your hearts, and dole out hugs in abundance. And I hope to see you again quite soon.